Okay, so this is the road to independence. The first Continental Congress of 1774 was called to make a list of grievances and present them to the British Crown. Although the people were irritated with the numerous acts, they were, very few of the people actually wanted to split from Britain during the first Congress. But before the Second Continental Congress of 1775 could meet, a fight broke out between the British and colonists in Lexington and Concord. So by July of 1775, Britain declared the colonists to be in rebellion and the American Revolution was initiated. The Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, officially declaring the war that the war would be a war of independence. Not all people agreed to break away from Britain at first. People were hesitant because they felt attached to the mother country, the culture, and they were just threatened by Britain's superior military at the time. Because you got to keep in mind, America, the colonies were pretty, they were just a couple decades old, while Britain was like centuries old. So, it's natural to feel a little threatened by someone who's that established. Loyalists and Tories were colonists who didn't want independence, and Patriots and Whigs were colonists who did want independence. Thomas Paine's pamphlet called Common Sense derided the monarchy and persuaded thousands of people to fight the War of Independence. It was really important in basically, kind of gaining that momentum in going into the American Revolutionary War and persuading people to really be on the American side. George Washington was chosen to lead the troops and ended up winning the war against Britain. The Treaty of Paris of 1783 established American independence 2 years after the final Battle of Yorktown. I'm not going to go into any details about military history just because they're not included on the AP exam. The only battle I think that's worth mentioning is the Battle of Saratoga during the American Revolution. Battle of Saratoga is important because the American army was losing terribly up until that point. After the Americans won Saratoga, the French actually decided to join the fight on the American side to defeat Britain, and after that, Americans pretty much conquered and won battle after battle, and they ended up winning the war. So during the Second Continental Congress, the first form of government was created for the U.S. called the Articles of Confederation. I'm sure you guys all know the Articles of Confederation was weak because it favored states. Congress couldn't tax or raise funds, causing each state to print its own money, and there was no national army. Shays' Rebellion is important because it shows the weakness of the Articles of Confederation. When the farmers and war veterans protested and shut down courts, the government couldn't really do anything because there was no military to kind of thwart that rebellion. The Constitutional Convention took place in 1787 with the objective of creating the U.S. Constitution. Federalists supported the Constitution. Anti-Federalists didn't support the Constitution. The biggest obstacle in the way of ratifying the Constitution was the battle between the large states, who wanted representation based on population, and the small states, who wanted equal representation. The Great Compromise combined both ideas by creating a bicameral legislature with one part dependent on population, the House of Representatives, and the other equally represented, the Senate. Another obstacle in ratifying the Constitution was the question of slavery. Slavery was purposely left out of the Constitution because the southern states who depended on slavery for plantation work and therefore the very existence of their economy, they would never have agreed to ban it. Now, the northern states wanted to ban it, the southern states didn't, and the northerners knew that they couldn't pass the Constitution by completely eliminating slavery, so they just decided to leave it and not even address the issue in the Constitution. And since it was agreed that slavery would not be banned, the next dilemma that they had to resolve was whether slaves would count as people when choosing the number of members allocated for each state in the House of Representatives, because remember, the House of Representatives is based on population. So the solution was the 3/5 compromise, which basically made each slave equivalent to 3/5 of a person. And when it came to counting people for votes based on population, each slave was basically counted as 3/5 of an individual, which is kind of dehumanizing, but I mean, it was slavery, so that's sad. The next thing that we will discuss is George Washington, who was a Federalist. And as mentioned earlier, creating the Constitution was a very controversial issue. The first political parties were formed to represent the two main groups in America, the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. And these Federalists and Anti-Federalists aren't the same ones I talked about earlier, who favored and opposed the creation of Constitution. This is a completely different party now. This political party, the Federalist political party, was led by Alexander Hamilton and John Adams. Their party platform consisted of a loose interpretation of the Constitution, strong national government, and construction of a national bank, along with pro-British policies. The Anti-Federalist political party, also called the Democratic Republican Party, were led by James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. Their party platform consisted of a narrow interpretation of the Constitution. They favored farmers, they opposed the national bank, and they were pro-French policies. During Washington's presidency, Hamilton was Secretary of State, and his biggest issue was that he really wanted to establish a national bank. Anti-Federalists like Madison felt like it was not a constitutional right for the federal government to create a national bank. So Hamilton's view is referred to as broad or loose interpretation of the Constitution because he didn't follow it word for word, while Madison's view is called the strict or narrow interpretation of the Constitution because they wanted to follow the Constitution literally word for word. The Whiskey Rebellion is important because it was the first rebellion on the new that the new government had to face. And during the Whiskey Rebellion, farmers protested attacks on whiskey. And unlike Shays' Rebellion during the Articles of Confederation, the Whiskey Rebellion was easily stopped by Washington with his order of the national military to stop it. The final important thing that you should know about Washington is that he established the two-term rule, the rule that it basically states that presidents can only serve as presidents for 2 terms. This rule was not really part of the Constitution. It was just an unspoken code among presidents because that's what George Washington did. Until FDR came along, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and I'll talk about him later on in my videos. And he was elected like 3 or 4 times, but after FDR, an amendment was passed to officially make it 2 terms that a president can serve. But I'll talk about that more later on. As Washington was giving his farewell address in 1796, he warned Americans to stay clear of political factions, which is basically present-day political parties, and he advocated neutrality in foreign affairs. Washington saw political parties starting to develop, like Hamilton's Federalists and Madison's Anti-Federalists, and he was determined to stop them from growing. He obviously failed because today we have the Democrats and Republicans, and we all know how that's going. Alright, so next I'll go ahead and talk about, in my next video I'll talk about the presidents, and I'll start off with Adams.